Greetings everyone, I am Shakina the Neurodisruptor and I am back again with another video on politics and prophecy with Shakina. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about our current Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, and how he has led the country into an Islamic terrorist attack. Please be aware that it is a serious crime to falsely claim that the country is under an Islamic terrorist attack. So when I say that the country is under an Islamic terrorist attack, I mean it. Okay, it seems that a lot of people are not taking this seriously, and I seem to be the only one in the country who gets it, right? Nobody gets it more than I do. And so it's up to me to, take charge, take initiative. If I see that our country is at risk and our country's at danger, as a citizen, I am obligated to do something to diffuse the danger that our country's under, especially when our Prime Minister not only is not doing anything about it, but is the one who led us into this terrorist attack that we are currently under. It's important to note that there are over 250 definitions on terrorism, and there could be several reasons why they are reluctant to fully define and go by one universal definition of terrorism, but we're not going to get into that. It's just important to know that terrorism can be defined in a multitude of ways. At its most fundamental level, at its basic level, terrorism is described as the use of force, violence, or engaging in any unlawful activity that causes a sense of fear and terror or horror in people, with the intention of materializing a political agenda or reaching some sort of political aim. Okay. The other thing that is important to note is that terrorism, especially here in Western society, we have really come to understand terrorism to be only the use of violence and vandalism of property or destruction of property. We look at terrorist groups like ISIS or Al-Shabaab. Right, we look at what happened with the Twin Towers, 9/11, or with the Boston shooting, and this is our conception of terrorism. Now, yes, that sort of radical Islamic terrorism exists, and it's real, and it's a threat to Western civility, but there's also another form of terrorism that has emerged that we have completely ignored, to the point now where it has turned into a full-blown terrorist attack that has the entire country under siege. And I'm actually seeing other parts of the Western world are also falling in line with what's happening here in Canada. And this is an Islamic terrorism that is being pioneered and perpetrated by what this new moderate Muslim. Okay, so apparently moderate Muslims are Muslims who have identified that Islam, in the way it's being practiced, specifically Wahhabi Islam, it's important to note that there are so many different sects, and we're not going to get into that in this video, but particularly Wahhabi Islam, which is the Islam that's being practiced the most, and a lot of these terrorist groups are coming from that sort of doctrine or ideology. And so these moderate Muslims have identified that Islam is, oppressive and, diabolical. And they've also identified that there's this shift that's happening, and we're entering a new era of politics, a new era of governance. And so they've realized now, people are awakening, they're becoming more conscious, and the things that Muslims used to get away with, they just won't be able to get away with anymore. And the justifications or arguments that they used to give to, explain away some of the horrific practices that are legislated within their religion are not going to work anymore either. And so what's happened now is we have these moderate Muslims, and they've come and they've said, you know what, we are redefining Islam for ourselves. Some of them have gone as far as to start mosques, new mosques with their new doctrine or ideology. Others, are taking this political Islamism, this moderate political Islamism, and they're bringing it into government, into Congress. If you look at Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, these two are also known as the Jihad Squad. They are perpetrators of moderate Islamic terrorism, and the worst part of moderate Muslims is how they gaslight onlookers, those of us who are on the outside. And remember, I was born and raised Muslim. I left that madness, that Sharia madness 14 years ago, and thank Jesus, because Jesus saved me from that madness. But I can see that they're gaslighting us a whole ton. And what's happened with these moderate Muslims is, like I said, they've redefined and they've created a new Islam for themselves, right? And the worst part, though, is that they want the whole world, especially here in the West, to see this as the paragon of Islamic morality. And they want us to see this as the new Islam, and they want us to accept this new moderate Islam that they've created. But that's the whole point, is that we don't see the danger in that. Because what's happened is, now that they've created this new Islam, and they're trying to convince the whole world that this is what Islam really is. The real Islam that the world has feared for nearly 2 decades now, that real Islam is still being practiced. Okay? It's still being practiced. It still has power. And it's still terrorizing and affecting the most vulnerable of their population, which tends to be children, both boys and girls, and women. Okay? But you have these moderate Muslims who are actually not doing anything to address the atrocities that are happening within Wahhabi Islam, to address the terroristic violence, to deal with the oppressive legislation. They're doing absolutely nothing. They've just decided that they see that they can't get any political power with their old Islamic doctrine in this new era, and so they've created this new moderate Islam and gaslighting the rest of the world and trying to convince us that this is the new Islam, and it's just totally not the case. And so it's important for us, I'm going to quote Donald Trump here, and honestly, to me, I am a huge Trump supporter. In fact, I have been permanently banned off Facebook, and they've suspended my Twitter account because I am advocating for Donald Trump to be back in his rightful position as the president of the United States of America. And so I've been banned as a result of supporting him. But one thing Donald Trump has said, which is so crucial for us to really reflect on and think about moving forward, and that's, if we're going to fight Islamic terrorism here in Canada, if we're going to fight Islamic terrorism in the West, we need to be able to name our enemy. We need to be able to say that radical and moderate Islamic terrorism exists. We need to be able to say that moderate and radical Muslim terrorists exist. We need to be able to identify them. We need to be able to define what Islamic terrorism looks like, right? We need to be able to define it, but we also need to be able to identify when we actually see it in action, right? So this is what Donald Trump has said, and I agree with him. It's absolutely imperative that we're able to name our enemy, identify our enemy, define, their goals, their political mandate, and understand the kinds of weapons that they use. And in this case, the Islamic terrorist attack that we are under has been fueled by the Liberal Party, specifically Justin Trudeau, and this Islamophobia agenda that he has pioneered here within Canada. And this Islamophobia agenda, there is absolutely nothing normal or healthy about this Islamophobia agenda. Okay, it's a response, a narcissistic response to people who have identified that this religion is oppressive and abusive, and there are parts of this religion that need to be reformed. And every time we try to speak out on it, we are silenced and told that we are promoting Islamophobia or we are Islamophobic. And he has normalized this, and there's nothing normal about it. On top of normalizing it, he's monopolized on it, so he's taken advantage of the fact that he's the one who's really connected to this Islamophobia agenda or campaign, and then he's gone as far as to capitalize on it. So he squanders or wastes millions of taxpayers' money every election, and even in between terms, funding this Islamophobia agenda and this Islamophobia campaign. He recently just had the National Islamophobia Summit, where they talked about millions of dollars that they were going to be pouring into initiatives to end Islamophobia. Okay. And this Islamophobia agenda is exactly what has led us into this Islamic terrorist attack, because for years now, we've been trying to raise awareness about the things that are happening within Muslim communities as a result of some of the diabolical, inhumane practices that are legislated within this religion. And every time we do that, we are attacked for being Islamophobic. And now it's gotten to a point where Muslims have infiltrated Canadian government and have compromised our political system. So I'm going to tell you the story of my nonprofit organization, FemCare Community Health Initiative. The reason why it's relevant that I tell you this story is that it was throughout running throughout the experience of running this nonprofit organization that I experienced several forms of Islamic terrorism, several forms, and multiple times by different Muslim groups. So that's the other thing, is a lot of Muslims will try to dismiss some of the things that happen within Muslim communities and say it's culture, not religion. But there were Muslims from all different cultures that participated in terrorizing me while I was running my nonprofit organization. So FemCare Community Health Initiative was a nonprofit organization that started as a grassroots project. I was collecting menstrual products for low-income residents who menstruate and distributing them to homeless shelters and youth centers. This was an outstanding success, and so I continued to run these drives up until 2016, where I was involved in a severe car accident whereby I had to leave the work that I was doing in the community. I was also working as a long-term care nurse. I had to leave my career, and I was doing my master's in public health at the time at McMaster University, as well as my collaborative diploma program with the United Nations University Institute of Water, Environment, and Health. In February 2017, I ended up dropping from my education programs because I experienced a very severe trauma at my university, which I deemed to be retaliation as a result of advocating against some of the unlawful activity and corruption that I witnessed taking place at McMaster University and the United Nations University. I won't get into the details of that situation. It's long and it's not entirely relevant to today's video. Just know that I had to leave my program, and that changed my trajectory, because in summer 2017, I fell into a major depression. I was actually a suicidal depression. And now, though, I look back at it and I realize that I was visited by the dark night of the soul. It was actually my archangel who came to me, and he made me conscious of all the trauma and the suffering that I had experienced, that I had repressed and forgotten about because I didn't want to deal with it. And he basically said, you have the choice to either live in unforgiveness and anger towards what these people have done to you, or you have the option to repent for the ways in which you've contributed to your own pain, and to the pain of others. And so you repent so that God can forgive you, and you forgive so that God can forgive you. And when you do that, you'll be able to transcend this current state that you're in. And so I love God to absolutely to death and back to life. I love God more than anything or anyone. I'm willing to die for God. I'm willing to do anything for God. And so I repented, and God forgave me. I forgave those who harmed me, and then God forgave me, and then I transcended. So I experienced a death of my human soul, and then transcended into my goddess soul, and I was basically reborn. God asked me when I was reborn, and those of you who have studied the Kabbalah or studied Jewish tradition, everything I just said right now should make perfect sense to you. When I was reborn, God asked me if I would give him FemCare Community Health Initiative to fulfill his purposes to redeem humanity. Like I said, I love God more than anything, and so I said yes. So I gave God my project, my nonprofit organization. Well, at that time, it was a grassroots project. And then God said, okay, I want you to register it as a nonprofit organization. And once you've registered it, I want you to advocate for the city of Hamilton to fund menstrual products for low-income residents who menstruate. And so I did just that. And I landed period poverty on the political agenda. Now, one of the things that God had instructed me to do was to share my story of my own experiences with trauma related to my menstrual cycle. So I shared my story, and it was published under Hamilton Spectator's News, and it went viral, and the story got published in multiple media outlets throughout the world. And one of the main things that I talked about was how difficult it was to be a menstruator, to be somebody who menstruates it within the Muslim community, right? Because menstruation was considered filthy, so we're not allowed to pray, not allowed to fast when you're on your period. And on top of that, I was experiencing so much violence and stigma. Like, people were disgusted of me in my community for having gotten my period, and I was treated so badly as a result of it. One of the things that my father used to do, for example, is withhold the money that I needed to buy menstrual products. The first time I got my period, he laughed at me. He mocked me in front of my entire family. It's very common practice for menstruation to be stigmatized within Muslim communities. Now, the worst part of being a menstruator in Islam is that you're not given the space or the time, most importantly, the time to grow and fully develop into an adult before people in the Muslim community start preying on you, because you're now marriageable, you're now at a marriageable age, and so you're going to start getting proposals. I got my period when I was 11 years old. I started getting proposals from Muslim men who were in their mid-30s. Some of them were even in their 40s, and they were asking for my hand in marriage. And people in my community, some of them laughed, some of them celebrated it, some of them thought it was cute, some of them thought I should be grateful that I was getting all these proposals at such a young age. Some were even jealous that I was getting these proposals because it meant that I was so beautiful at such a young age that I was getting all these proposals. So it's a very pathological, sickening mentality, but this is normal in Muslim communities. It's completely normal. Actually, to the point that I posted about it on Facebook in 2019. And I had a Pakistani woman in the city of Hamilton who's Muslim who came under my post publicly in front of everybody and said that menstruation is a marker of adulthood, and that's why as soon as a girl menstruates, she should be married off. This is a Pakistani woman who owns a business, you're probably frequenting her business, you're accessing her services, she's shopping in the same stores as you, and yet she goes home and she thinks that, you know, her 5-6-year-old daughter should be married off within the next 7 to 8 years. Okay? And this is here in Canada. Okay? So I wanted, under God's instruction, Jesus Christ, my goal was to use FemCare Community Health Initiative to raise awareness about how menstruation, the ignorant attitudes towards menstruation in Islam is fueling what I call the Islamic marriage industrial complex. Okay, it's fueling it. And basically, the Islamic marriage industrial complex is exactly what it is. It's an industry whereby they start grooming Muslim children at a young age to get married early. That way, they're not fully developed and they're not conscious enough to question their reality. And they're easier to control because that's the only way that you can keep a false religion alive, right? Is through slavery, through war crimes, through pedophilia. We saw that this is how their prophet even brought this religion into fruition in the first place. He did it with war crimes, sex slavery, violence, right? And we're seeing the same thing still happening today. It's the same cycle, the same algorithm replaying itself. And then we have these moderate Muslims who are trying to tell us that this is not what's happening. So I shared my story, and the goal, even though I started advocating for period poverty, I only did that because it was the safest thing and it was the easiest thing. You can't really debate giving free menstrual products to homeless menstruators. You can't really debate that without sounding completely evil. So that's exactly why I took that route. But my end goal was to use this platform, this political platform that I created for myself, to advocate against child marriage, child sex slavery, and the grooming of children in Islam and within Muslim communities. I was subjected to severe Islamic terrorism as a result. The first Islamic terrorist attack I experienced was with Minister Maryam Monsef. She is the former Minister of Status of Women under the Liberal Party cabinet, under Justin Trudeau. I spoke to Maryam Monsef on several occasions about the issue of period poverty and talked to her about my personal story of having almost been married off as a child bride. And I tied it into my menstrual cycle and explained to her that I wanted to use this story and this political platform that I created for myself to continue to advocate against this issue. I thought that, I made the assumption that because she's the Minister of Status of Women, that this is something that she would be concerned with. Instead, and the other thing is that I advocated for her to go back to the cabinet and encourage them to implement the Menstrual Equity for All Act. So that was a national act that was tabled by Senator Grace Meng in 2017 in New York. This was under President Donald Trump's term. Okay. And I encouraged them to take inspiration from what was happening under Trump's presidency and bring it here to Canada and implement the same legislation here. So this was a poverty reduction strategy, because the goal was to get these products to the people who needed them most so that they could live fulfilling lives. They can go to school, they can get an education, they can get a job, they can participate in social life, etc. Instead of taking this on as a poverty reduction strategy, and instead of following the lead that I was giving the Liberal Party with respect to where I wanted this policy dialogue to go, they instead took my work and turned it into a feminist initiative. So they, instead of taking that money and using it to fund menstrual products for low-income residents, they took my money, or they took, the government's money, but they took my work and my initiative to then fund menstrual products in federally regulated washrooms. I don't care about Maryam Monsef or any other parliamentarian getting access to menstrual products when they're at work. That's none of my business. They can advocate for that themselves. What I care about is, first and foremost, getting these products to those who need them the most and the people who can't afford them, so we can get them out of poverty. Because ultimately, if we have the high poverty rate that we do, which our poverty rate when I last checked was 27% in Ontario, most of them are women, single women. If that is the case, okay, then we need to first tackle poverty. We don't care about feminism. Feminism is completely irrelevant to what we're trying to do here, which is poverty reduction. Feminism has done nothing to reduce poverty. Nothing. All you do is yell, scream, and steal other people's work and terrorize other people who are doing real work. You've done nothing to end poverty. Nothing. And I was trying to end it, and this is what she did instead. Now, the worst part about this, on top of this Muslim parliamentarian taking, our work and taking our money that way, she then conspired to cover up the biggest Islamic terrorist campaign that has ever taken place. And that's what happened to me when I was 15 years old, and I was abducted to the Republic of Kenya and almost married off as a child bride to a 33-year-old man. When I managed to escape the marriage, my family started hunting me down for an honor killing. I managed to escape by I collaborated with the Canadian government to organize my escape back to Canada, where I lived with a Muslim family, and their son held me as a sex slave for 5 years. Whenever I try to talk about the abuse that I experienced living with this Muslim family, they go on this rampage. They have gone on over 2 decades long character assassination campaign so that people wouldn't believe my story. Okay. I then said the only way that people are going to be able to hear my story, what I went through, because it's not only about me. There are tons of Muslim children who are being abducted by their parents from the West and taken back to their Muslim countries, where they can do whatever they want with them there. Because here, the government protects children. Well, they used to protect children until now we're under this Islamic terrorist attack, and now children are the ones who are greatest risk. Because in Islam, child abuse is completely acceptable. It's legislated, it's acceptable. Muslim communities expect it as well. And if you don't abuse your child, you're kind of an anomaly. The next person who subjected me to an Islamic terrorist attack was Farheen Khan. This Farheen Khan is a Pakistani woman who has a show, which I can't recall the name of her show now, but she asked me to come on for an interview. So I went on for an interview, and then shortly after I came out talking about my child bride story, she then started the women's only mosque. She claimed that she had the idea for years, but she never brought it into fruition. It's not true. She was inspired to start the women's only mosque after she read my story. And one of the things, if you read the description of this women's only mosque, one of the things that they're apparently fighting is child marriage in Islam. She asked me to lead the prayer during their grand opening. And then when I accepted the invitation to lead the prayer, several weeks later, she posts on Facebook a thank you. She's thanking some other South Asian woman, who I don't need to mention her name, but another South Asian woman for agreeing to lead the prayer. So I sent her a message. I said, "Hey Farheen, are you did you still want me to lead the prayer, or what, have you changed your mind?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, I totally forgot that I asked you to lead. Actually, I'm getting so and so to lead the prayer instead, but you could always lead the adhan if you want." Now, for those who don't know, in Islamic history, there's a man named Bilal, and there's actually a movie on him, and he was a black man who apparently was a slave, and Prophet Muhammad and his disciples found him and they freed him from slavery. And one of the things that the Prophet Muhammad did to ennoble him was allow him to go up on the minaret once it was built and be the first one in this mosque that was built after Islam triumphed, to be the first one to lead the call to prayer. And so that was the Prophet's way of ennobling him from a slave to a noble Muslim man, was allowing him to lead this call to prayer. That was his mark in Islamic history. So what she's basically telling me is, your mark in our history, in this first mosque that we're building, your mark can be leading the prayer. So just like how the left is constantly attacking the right about racist microaggressions, what she did, that was a very, very, very severe anti-black racist microaggression. And that's the other thing, is that anti-blackness in Islam is also another huge problem, right? But they're blaming they'll blame white people and then don't talk about anti-blackness in the Muslim community, which brings me to my next person who has subjected me to terroristic violence, and that's Yusra Khojaly. For those who don't know, Yusra Khojaly is a moderate Muslim terrorist who was responsible for founding Black Lives Matter Toronto. She was one of the co-founders. I think it was back in 2015 or 16, it was announced on the news that she had tweeted, "Oh, Ya Allah," or "Oh Allah, I pray for the strength. I pray that you give me the strength not to kill these men and white people out here today." So here's what I find interesting about that. In and around that time, I started advocating about anti-black racism within the Muslim community. She was one of the people who attacked me when I was advocating against some of the things that happened within the Muslim community. Of course, she used another reason to attack me, but I know the real reason she was attacking me was because of the things that I was saying in the Muslim community, because she was one among many other black Muslims who attacked me when I talked about anti-black racism in the Muslim community. What I find interesting is how Yusra Khojaly, and we know that she said it about men too, but we know that her real target is white people, okay? Because that's Black Lives Matter. What were they doing? Their whole modus operandi was to attack white people and to dehumanize white people. And so what I find really disturbing about Yusra Khojaly is that she could get so angry that she needs to pray to her Allah for the strength not to kill white people, and yet has almost no anger towards the anti-black violence that's perpetrated by light-skinned Muslims, particularly from South Asia and Arabs from the Middle East. Right? So that says several things. That first of all says that her anger towards white people is not righteous anger. She's not angry at the oppression towards white people, okay? Because at the oppression towards black people from white people. It's not a righteous anger. Because if it was a righteous anger, she would be just as angry at the violence that white Arabs perpetrate towards black Arabs. And they talk about it a lot in the Middle East, and nothing is being done about it. Right? So there's that. And so that tells me that she either has not studied enough about the history of anti-blackness, and she doesn't take a geopolitical perspective when she studies it, which how can you not take a geopolitical perspective on anti-blackness in the most multicultural country in the world? White Arabs are here terrorizing black people on a regular basis, and absolutely nothing is being done about it because they're not seen as perpetrators of anti-black racist violence. So this tells me that Yusra's anger towards white people is fueled by moderate Islamic terrorism and not necessarily a righteous anger towards race-based oppression, because she would be angry at all people she would be just as angry at all people, not just white people. And then the next one is Leanna Malawi. With Leanna Malawi, I'm not going to get into it in too much detail because I did a whole video on her. I will link it below. I did a whole video on what she did, but this woman came into my nonprofit organization under the guise of wanting to help, but really she launched a full-blown Islamic terrorist attack against me. What's dangerous about what she did is her terrorist attack spanned all the way to the Middle East, where she collaborated with white Arab Muslim activists in Jordan, in Lebanon, and most frighteningly in Palestine, where Hamas is one of the most vicious terrorist groups that we're dealing with today. And she went to Gaza, and she disclosed all this sensitive information that she got from my government organization. And she went to Gaza and disclosed all this sensitive information, not putting only me at risk of more violence, but putting this entire country at risk of a Middle Eastern Islamic terrorist invasion. Okay, because now they have sensitive information about how our government works, because this nonprofit organization, it wasn't only about promoting menstrual health and wellness. The government of Canada gave me authority to test a new pilot program, a new political system and governance model. So I wasn't just educating about menstrual health and wellness. I was showing a new way of doing policy based on my studies in my master's program, right? And I think she thought that she was going to be, some sort of hero for Muslims, and she would come into my Jewish organization, she'd overthrow me so I wouldn't have a platform to be able to relay my message out there and to continue to do my advocacy work and to seek justice for what happened to me, because I still have not gotten any justice for what happened to me. And the government of Canada has done absolutely nothing to my father, who is a Muslim terrorist. They have an international Muslim terrorist on top of that, and they have done nothing whatsoever to seek justice and to punish him for the things that he's done. My father continues to he marries young women. He continues to leave the country to go out and marry young girls in East Africa. I've heard this from other people because I don't speak to my family anymore, but I've heard from other people that he's doing these things. My father was a huge pedophile. Again, that's also common in Muslim communities, and they don't want to talk about it. So what are the future implications of this? This video has already been long enough, so I'm going to try and cut it here. I'm going to keep doing videos to break these things down in more detail. This is just to give you an overview of what's happening, but I'm going to go into more detail and do a specific video on each of these Muslim terrorists that I have mentioned, because they're putting the country at risk. And this can't keep going. Okay, there's no positive way to say what I'm about to say, so I'm just going to say it. Allowing Muslims to occupy office here in the Western world, is a form of legislated domestic terrorism. okay? There is no way for Muslims to occupy office here in the West and still remain Muslim, because Islam is not only a religious tradition, it is also a political system with its own hierarchy, its own laws, and its own policies. And Muslims are obligated to swear allegiance to the Prophet Muhammad and to swear allegiance to Sharia law, and they are obligated to promote Sharia law and to push for Sharia law at whatever cost, even if it means through unlawful activity and violence. So we've seen that happen with some of these Muslim terrorists, moderate Muslim terrorists that I mentioned here in this video, right? And their goal, they used unlawful force, they violated the Constitution, or they used discriminatory practices, okay, to reach a political aim. And the political aim is to ensure that Islam continues to flourish irrespective of the oppressive practices that are legislated within the religion, is to ensure that Muslims are not held accountable for their terrorism towards their own children and towards other non-Muslims, especially those who speak out against their religion. And the other thing is to keep Islam politically relevant here in the West at a time where we are ushering in God's kingdom, Jesus Christ's millennial reign. So Satan is using Muslims to try and stop this emergence, which is the emergence of this new millennial kingdom that will be ruled over by our Lord and Savior, the Son of God, Jesus Christ. And Muslims do not want to allow this emergence to happen, and so they will use these insidious, secretive, unlawful methods to try and reach their political aims. We have to see that terrorism is not just bombing buildings, ISIS, Al-Shabaab. No. If you are attacking our Constitution, if you're violating our Constitution so that Islam is not held accountable for the atrocities that it legislates, and if you're violating our Constitution and you're